You can sure tell this is a bunch of appraisers. Everybody's just sitting there. Nobody's saying nothing. Hi, everybody. How y'all doing? It's okay. You can answer. It's all right. Unmute your microphones and you can say, hello, how's everybody doing? Hi, good to see you again. It's all right.
Hey, Tim, thanks for sharing time with us today. Much appreciated.
Oh, yeah, this is going to be fun, Joe. Thank you.
We're all afraid of being sued. Harry, doesn't cover.
And yeah, Carlton, for some of us, we probably should be afraid.
Yeah, that OREP article yesterday was kind of eye-opening.
Yeah, wasn't that interesting? But, have y'all read the entirety of that lawsuit? Because if you haven't, it'll make you sit up and take notice. And it's available on the internet. You can download it, or if you can't find it, if you'll email me, I'll send you a copy. But you need to read the whole thing. And hey, Howard, you need to read the whole thing because unfortunately, some of it makes sense. And we've got to be familiar with what the plaintiffs are alleging that appraisers do. And this is not appraisers are biased in the sense that appraisers hate a minority or a religion or something like that. This is biased in the sense that the appraisers specifically took steps that robbed the borrower of certain of their constitutional rights. So this is much more than just, somebody hates minorities, somebody hates a specific religion or something like that. It's significantly more. That's why you've got to read the entire lawsuit so you know where the plaintiffs are coming from. Dave, you're on mute. Dave Town, you're on mute. Dave, you're still on. There you go.
Yeah, that what you just said, Tim, that it speaks volumes about appraiser competency in their own local markets. It's really disappointing and very discouraging to see accusations come out like that when it's really kind of clear what's going on with that appraiser.
Yeah, and unfortunately, what's that old saying? There, but for the grace of God, go I. So that's something that could happen to any one of us, quite frankly.
We'll get started in just 1 minute.
How you doing, George?
I'm doing great now that you're here.
You can tell George has a very dry sense of humor.
Yes, he does. He has a very dry sense of humor.
I'm not going to take any more of these insults today.
What, you going to wait till tomorrow?
He's going to mute everybody.
Well, my teddy bear is happy everybody's here. All right, well, go ahead and move along. Want to thank Tim for agreeing to do this, even though he has no sense of humor. Next month, we have Joan Trice coming up. She's going to talk about the complexities of the regulatory system that runs our world. She, a couple of years ago, did a wonderful job in a presentation to Congress or the committee that showed the complexities. No wonder we have problems. And coming in March, we have Scott Bruder tentatively set up. Don't have a date set yet, but he'll be talking about the new changes. There, we may have some actual changes, or at least more about that as we move on here in a couple of months. Last month, we had Lyle Radke from Fannie Mae, who talked about handling bias, reproducibility in appraisals, what they're looking for in the future, and they're looking for evidence-based valuation. He also used some other words we'll mention again later. Joan Trice is coming up next week. The complex regulatory complex. Is there a way out of it? Well, you know, the only chance we have right now is with the federal agencies seriously looking at this thing under pressure from our current president. So who knows? We may have some change. I'm crossing my fingers. And I want to thank Tim, longtime friend of mine. And my gosh, we've known each other for 3-4 weeks now, I think. It's been wonderful. I'm looking for,
Yeah, what did
I'm
you
trying to
say?
make this guy laugh. All right, there's a smile. All right. Tim's been a great supporter. I really appreciate your being here today. He'll be talking about highest and best use and market value, the internal conflict of words there. I'll start out this with about 10-15 minutes of kind of building a foundation for what Tim's going to go into. And then kind of after Tim's done, I'll do a few minutes on putting it in the context of what possible changes are coming. All along, feel free to post your questions on the chat line. We have Cindy, who is our producer, director, manager, and I'll give her a couple of minutes near the end of the presentation. Also, Joe Lynch is here. Wave your hand. That's Joe. He's been a long-term supporter and has helped me teach a number of classes. And then Bruce Hahn, I don't see him on yet, but I'm going to give him just 3 or 4 minutes talking about what he does. And Anna O'Rourke is waving her hand, demanding some attention. Anna's been a great supporter for years, and thank you for your support and getting the word out on these presentations. Here's kind of our history. We started out on price indexing. It was an incredible hit. It was our first shot out, and we had almost exactly 1,000 people sign up that very first time. So that motivated us to keep doing this, these free webinars every month. So we've talked about time adjustments. Peter Christensen, the lawyer, talked about how to avoid being accused of bias. Bruce, a couple of months ago, talked about avoiding reconsideration of value. We got Lyle last month talking about those. And again, thank you for Ann, Isaac Peck at OREP, and E&O Company. Steve Smith, my classes would not have happened if it wasn't Steve Smith 15 years ago, who literally pushed me into teaching classes that I didn't want to teach. Craig has helped a few times, and he gets the word out on several Facebook accounts. He seems to be all over the place. And then Joe Lynch and Brian Melsheimer of the REAA, the Northern California group that's done. I want to remind you all, we take no advertising, so we're not beholden to anybody. The only thing we do try to sell is the classes on stats, graphs, and data science to push the profession into the future. For me, it was an accident of my life. It's a long story, I won't get into it, but I took a whole bunch of graduate level classes after I was an appraiser, mostly in economics, econometrics, statistics, and all the time trying to figure out how this highfalutin stuff fit into appraisal. So that's how I got into it. The GSEs, this information is less than 3 months old. This was said by Lyle about 3 months ago. Appraisers see their job as an art form. It's hard for them to rigorously explain exactly what they're doing. He said this at the Housing Wire conference. There was only a handful of appraisers there, and I was one of them. But the audience laughed. I hate to tell you, they did. They giggled. And then also, Scott Reuter, Freddie Mac, appraisers need to spend time in developing a market conditions analysis in the appraisal. It's truly the backbone of the appraisal. This is tying in with our topics today, highest and best use and market analysis and the very definition of market value. And Scott went on later on talking about how in the future they're hoping to get some forecasting type of information from appraisers also, and to fill in that gap when they're evaluating risk between macroeconomics and what appraisers do. When Lyle talked at the Appraisal Summit recently, about 8 or 10 weeks ago, he noted 4 elements to help reduce the potential for both bias and human error. And he used the words factual, objective, reproducible, and auditable. And I got to tell you, I was really happy about that because we've been using those words, reproducibility and auditability. Up in Northern California, Joe, I think you were up there in the class about 8 or 9 years ago, did a class on auditable appraisal best practices. So it's fine, it's coming in. So that's the stuff we try to teach and get you ready to do that. We do have a class coming up February 10th online, 3.5 hours a day for 4 days, 14 hours credit in most states. Today, Tim Andersen is going to be talking about conflicts with highest and best use and market value. So let me kind of put together a quick overview of this. And the overview is this is one of many conflicts that we find in appraisal. One that I wrote a lot about over the years is the 1004MC, which was required by Fannie and Freddie, but could actually seldom would produce a correct time adjustment and could even produce one in the wrong direction if you followed their directions. As a result of that, I came to the conclusion that to really do an appraisal right, I should modify the definition of market value and call it a Fannie Mae value if I use their time adjustment instead of my best judgment. My judgment rules over all. I'm the guy that has to sign for that. The claim market value versus actual market value. I've got a couple of slides on that that are funny. And then well, I've been very active on the statistical side, and I think we've gone down the wrong track in teaching inferential random sample statistics. Appraisers don't do random samples. We very carefully pick our data. And so that's in my mind, a lot of wasted time there teaching inferential statistics. The conflict, Tim will probably mention this also, the conflict between what standard rule 1 requires appraisers to be tested on for scope of work, and that very same work then is tested by 5 completely different parameters that reviewers are charged for. There's only 3 USPAP violations. Everything else is somebody's opinion that you violated. I see Craig Gilbert on here. Hi, Craig. Thanks for showing up. Craig's been a big help all along. The ANSI measurement standards. I wanted to go through this list of conflicts because the more I thought about this ANSI standard thing, the more I see that it has similarities to the 1004MC problem. If you measure a house by ANSI standards, but nobody else in your neighborhood is measuring by ANSI standards, if the brokers are measuring a different way, if everybody's just following the tax assessor who did things different way 15 or 30 years ago, you're going to get a different value because your measurement tool is different from everybody else's measurement tool. And that's a paradox. It's a catch-22. You do it one way, you're wrong. You do it the other way, you're wrong. So we'll talk about that a little bit. Hi, Jason. I see you shaking your head. Also, Jason's been a great supporter over the years also. Thanks. And I apologize. There's so many friends on here today. I can't mention everybody, but I'll pop out a word every once in a while that comes in my mind. I see Shannon Slater on here also. Great supporter. Thank you. Highest use or probable use. We've gone back and forth on that. Highest and best use can be a guess. It's something you have to decide. In order to even decide whether it's a house or a gas station or a hotel, you have to make your first best guess right from the beginning. You could be wrong. Market value is defined as actually not a value, it's a market price. It ignores the fundamental or sustainable value, as some people call it now, for in use. People don't buy a house for anything other than the value as a place to live, to sleep, to raise their children, to cook, to sleep, to entertain. Market value, and this is a quick rundown, and Tim will get into it pretty deeply here. This market value assumes a buyer and seller are prudent and knowledgeable. There's no undue stimulus. They're typically motivated. They're well-informed or well-advised. There's reasonable exposure time, cash terms, and not affected by special or creative financing. So kind of set the table there. Data science, the hypothesis, kind of like the scope of work. I'm going to go through this quickly. I don't want to spend a whole bunch of time on it. but it is the basis for reasoning. I think it's a house, so I'm going to pull comps on a house. Have you ever done that and gone out? I did, and a house was not a house. It was a commercial property that looked like a house, but it wasn't a house. It was not a residential property. So our scope of work, our hypothesis is a supposition or proposed explanation, which when we then further examine based on, but we start out with limited evidence, starting point, we go with what the client tells us. Here's one issue with ANSI that I see as being, I guess right now it's just Fannie Mae that's talking about you're required to report, analyze, and measure according to the ANSI standards. What I see a lot of complaints from appraisers have been is that they're pushing us into this. The appraisers can be our data collectors. Now, in the long run, the ANSI standards after 20, 30 years will probably be a good thing because everybody will do it. However, right now, only appraisers are required to do it. Nobody else is. And it's going to be forever before we get a consistency on this. So we're required to do ANSI as a measurement and a reporting requirement. But what are we charged with? We're charged with comparison. We have to measure apples to apples, not apples to bananas. That's where we get stuck. Tim and I have talked about this, although Tim is going to focus on the market value and highest and best use issue. We will touch upon this ANSI issue because it's such a hot topic right now, and it relates also. And it's yet one more paradox that we appraisers have to deal with. This may be what I just coined these words for this presentation, a wrongful algorithm. And we're hearing a lot more about that. Algorithms that get plugged in and get used and reused, and it turns out they're wrong. And we found that in AVM type of issues and machine learning. Okay, a little bit of fun here. A bifurcated appraiser. A hybrid is an inspection done by somebody else, an evaluation by you. A low bid appraisal is inspection by you and evaluation by a algorithm, AVM, or something the client does with the data you have collected. And then the one I like the most of all is the no bid valuation, which assures that no pesky appraiser is going to blow the deal for you. Okay. Was that really a dry humor? Nah, I did good that time. I love that one. I even made Steve Roach laugh on that one, if you know him. And he doesn't laugh very much. I don't know. All right. Okay. Most conflict or within appraisal result from things being outdated. Our practices, we continue doing them the way we were taught, literally the way the profession was taught in the 1930s and 40s for the most part. Our education continues to regurgitate that. The appraisal standards were built around stuff that was written 30, 40, 50 years ago. Really right on 30 years ago today. It doesn't really address the real issue that our clients need, which is risk, reliability, investment potential, collateral risk, or equity, like for tax assessors or our court system. And our regulatory system, of course, enforces all this. And lo and behold, that's what our clients expect because most of them were us moved to a different type of a job. So we're just repeating the same stuff. Elements of modernized evaluation. Well, and I know Tim agrees with me on this, market analysis is appraisal, or appraisal is market analysis. Modernized appraisal means we're improving appraiser judgment. We're not discarding your judgment. We're making it sharp, making your brain sharper. More information. The use of complete data instead of just picking 3 comps or 5 comps. Using all the data, all the right information, the relevant information gives you a better answer. Data visualization is a big part of data science. You can see markets, you can see large data sets, you can see 3 comps, but you can't see 9 comps. The human brain just zonks out. So all of this reduces the potential for bias, and that bias being either intentional or unintentional. And I want to take a moment just to pause Added services, price validation. These are other things that appraisers can sell. Price validation. I think Appraisal Institute actually has a seminar either in process or coming up on that. We can forecast values like commercial appraisers do all the time for construction projects, like relocation appraisers do on the residential side. We can do real-time revaluation. Once the problem is set, you plug in new data and give you a very quick update value. Risk and reliability scoring, investment options, and audits of the process. The reason I hesitated was Bob Parson, who I was privileged that he once called me a good friend about it a couple of years ago. I've known him for many years. Many of you know he just passed away a few weeks ago. Former chief appraiser Freddie Mac, as I recall, he was the head appraiser at Office of Controller of Currency. Very forward-looking, simple, straightforward man. I just loved him. I just really found it necessary to take a moment here to recognize Bob Parson. He was truly a friend of the appraiser. I wish we had more Bob Parsons around. So I'll kind of start wrapping up my part of this presentation here very quickly. Those of you who have not been to my classes or presentations before, why is my basic class called Stats, Graphs, and Data Science? Well, data science, the science is a systematic study by observation or experiment, but it's got to be done by an expert in the scientific method and in appraisal and valuation. Data is the source of information. Data is just data. It doesn't tell you anything till you ask it a question. It can be anything. It could be measured, counted, but put in a series. Graphs, we use those because they connect large markets, large groups of data to the human brain visually. We are very visual, helps us see markets. Science helps us with our expert model decisions. You and I make the modeling decision. The computer runs the algorithms, gives us answers to sharpen our results. Data science is really very broad. It can include statistics, algorithms, machine learning, artificial intelligence, all of the other stuff you hear about. Data scientists use all of that. So let's kind of segue here into Tim's presentation, highest and best use. Notice the word highest is used there. And this is about all you'll find in USPAP, probably in the advisory opinions. An appraiser must analyze the relevant legal, physical, and economic factors to the extent necessary to support your opinion. Which comes first, the opinion or the support? The conflicts. Highest and best use relates to analysis of the marketplace. Market value relates to the analysis of the market segment, the competitive market segment. Notice the word marketplace. The marketplace can be your neighborhood or your town where all your little shopping centers are or your gas stations are. The market segment are the property, the sales that competed directly with the subject property. I find it's really important to distinguish between the marketplace and the competitive market segment. And lastly, I want to mention the definition of market value, which is the only one we're talking about here. Right, Tim? You're not going to talk about any other definitions of market value. There's about 20 or 30 other ones around. We got them. Market value. And go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, we're going to go with that one. Yeah.
I didn't understand that. Okay, I'm going to go on.
We are, go ahead.
Yeah, the microphone's not working well. I hope that's not a problem. About 10, 12 years ago, I was looking at the definition of market value, and you know what happened about 11 years ago. And I was thinking to myself, wow, we've not been following this market. We've been fudging on this definition of market value. So I tried to break it down into 6 or 7 bullet points that were important. Okay, buyer, seller acting prudently and knowledgeably, not affected by undue stimulus. They're typically motivated, well-informed, or well-advised. Exposure time, reasonable, cash dollars, unaffected by special creative financing. And I said, what was really happening? I asked myself, what was really happening 12 years ago? Everybody was going to get rich. Remember that? Everybody was going to look at this. If all I got to do is buy more houses. Here's the Dell, George Dell operative definition of market value. This is what was actually happening back then. Buyer and seller were acting speculatively with exuberance. They were affected by universal, we're going to get rich, euphoria. Buyer and seller were avariciously motivated. They're counseled by commissioned salespeople. Exposure time. I thought, oh, well, that was okay until my assistant Cindy pointed out to me, well, heck, there was no exposure time back then like we got right now. People were bidding against it. There was no exposure time. It was a completely different market structure. Payment in US dollars. I thought, okay, that one's easy. Well, 3 or 4 years later, I did an appraisal up in the Gold Coast area of Orange County with multi-million-dollar houses overlooking the ocean. I noted that a lot of those houses were empty. And I thought, okay, well, rich people have 2 or 3 houses. Well, it turned out about 30–40% of those houses were owned by Chinese nationals who were putting their Chinese yen into American land as a land banking because they felt more comfortable putting their money here for safety than leaving it there. Highest and best use was not a home, a place to live. It was to protect their money. It was, what's it called? You got the idea. The price represents a normal consideration of the property enabled by unrestricted, special, and creative financing provided by commissioned salespeople. After I got done, 7 out of 7 bullet points of this definition of market value that Tim's going to be talking about, we were ignoring. That's called groupthink. Everybody involved in the whole process. Do we see that politically sometimes? Sure. Tim, I'm going to turn it over to you. Hope your microphone works good. Go ahead and turn on your screen share, and I'll leave it to Tim here until he's done.
Yeah.
All right. Now, can everybody see the wizard?
You got
And
it.
it's gonna become clear when this is over what the wizard means. And it's kind of an inside joke, but it's there for a purpose. And of course, we have to celebrate George's very dry sense of humor. But we're going to talk about the wizardry in real estate appraisal, and how that on occasion has been known to, how shall we say, has been known to hurt us. And so what we're going to do as we go through this, we're going to study the conflict between the definition of market value, and George has just gone through both the textbook definition and his definition, which was rather cynical, but most likely correct. And then we're going to see if there is a conflict with highest and best use, as it is typically set out in our classroom situations, and what our state appraisal boards are looking at. Now, George had standard 3 up on the screen a couple of minutes ago. According to USPAP, there are 5 components of highest and best use. And state appraisal boards look in the report, in the work file, they want to see how the appraiser has handled all 5 of those separate concepts. And for example, the 5th one, the 4th one, talks about economic supply and demand. Well, appraisers are pretty good at measuring demand. We can get that off MLS, but it's much more difficult to measure supply because there is no central database of supply. And not only is that going to include houses that are for sale, it's going to include houses that are for sale by owner. It's going to include houses that are for sale by builders. and it's going to include houses that are that come on the market during the reasonable exposure time. Although, as George indicated, reasonable exposure times are getting quite short. So the point is, and then the standard rule 1-3B says the appraiser has to summarize the highest and best use someplace in the report. And part of the problem that we have as appraisers is that the software vendors are kind enough to say, well, here, we'll help you out that we will print out a highest and best use boilerplate. But if you look at it, if you read it critically, if you read it analytically, it doesn't say anything. It doesn't say anything about highest and best use, and we're going to see why. We're going to see why in a minute. And then we're also going to mention Dr. James Graskamp. And he was one of the great gurus of real estate appraisal. He passed on too early, but we're not going to get deeply into one of his appraisals, but he did an appraisal of 25 North Pinckney Street in downtown Madison, Wisconsin. If you don't know what Google Scholar is, go to your URL bar and type in scholar.google.com. And it looks a lot like Google, but it is more oriented towards scholarship than Facebook and Twitter and stuff like that. So if you will go to Google Scholar, scholar.google.com, and type in the appraisal of 25 North, and that's N period, Pinckney, Pinckney, it will come up. It's about an 85-page document. It's old. It was written in 1977. And there's some pretty nasty math in it. But we're going to take a look. We're just going to ignore the nasty math. In fact, we're not even going to look at the report. But what we're going to do is consider Graskamp's take on market value and highest and best use. And what you're going to find out will most likely surprise you, especially if you haven't been appraising for 30 years. And I know some of us here have. Some of us are familiar with Dr. Graskamp's work because we were alive when he was alive. Although I think he died in 1983. And if somebody's got better data on that than I do, please bring it to the fore. But this is the definition of market value that George is mentioning. And here are some of the conflicts. First of all, it says values price. Well, that's interesting because one of the first lessons we're taught in appraiser school is price, cost, and value aren't the same thing. But yet here, the definition of market value says values price. Go ahead, jump in there.
Yeah, sorry about that. There was a request to copy the link into the chat. Is that something that you can easily do? Or I found
Okay, I
this,
can't.
which I'm going to go ahead and
Cindy
share with
can.
everyone.
I can't. Yeah, Cindy can. I can't.
Is that, I found something, Graskamp's concept of highest and best use with Carrie
That's one of them.
Benhill
Yeah,
and Charles Carter. Is that the type of thing you want people
that's
to
one
see?
of them. No, that's one of them. But and he elucidates on his concept of highest and best use in that monograph. I'm directing you toward the appraisal he wrote of the property at 25 North Pinckney, which we're going to see in a few minutes. And I'll, spoiler alert, as far as Graskamp was concerned, there was no such thing as market value. There was no such thing as highest and best use. There was merely the most probable price under a given set of circumstances. And he has two sets of circumstances in that appraisal, one with seller financing, one with cash, and develops both of them in a most logical and persuasive manner. And that's why I recommend appraisers read it. It's a commercial appraisal. It's not a house. And as I say, we'll see a picture of the property in a few minutes. But the point is, there's no guessing. There are no leaps of logic. He explains everything step by step. So when he gets to his two conclusions. You don't have to agree with them, but you go, okay, I can follow that, other than the nasty math. But if that math looks hard, it really isn't. And we're not going to walk through it here. But if you want to download that appraisal and then contact me privately, I'll walk you through the math. It looks nasty, but it really isn't. A little time consuming, I'll concede that point, but it's not really that hard. So thank you for your question. I appreciate it. So as we get back to market value conflates value and price, which we're told we can't do. It talks about a competitive and open market. Well, some of you live in California. Some of you live in, I see Scott, my friend Colin there. Scott lives in Minneapolis. Been a ridiculously hot market. They've been hot markets all over the country. Well, are those competitive and open markets? They're competitive. Hell, they're highly competitive. And they're open because anybody with the money can jump in there. But when somebody buys something, is it under all conditions requisite to a fair sale? And then what, by chance, are those conditions? Okay. A number of years ago, my parents built a home. My dad was a builder. My mother was an interior decorator. And they gave a party, a little, very intimate dinner party one night for some of their friends. And they lived in a country club setting. And it was very lovely. It just, my wife and I were there. We got to work the kitchen, but it was just a lovely evening. And about a week later, one of the guys who was over there called my dad. My dad's name's Claire. He said, "Claire, I want to come talk to you about your house." Oh, okay. My dad's thinking, oh, I'm a builder. He's going to ask me to build a house like mine. So the guy's name was Eli. Eli comes over. They spend 15, 20 minutes being pleasant with each other. And then Eli, and I'm there, I'm watching this. My dad didn't tell me this. I'm there, sitting there. And Eli says, "Claire, my wife wants your house." And my dad said, "Well, Eli said, thank you so much. It's not for sale." And Eli says, "Claire, my wife wants your house." And Eli, it's not for, and he stopped and he realized what was happening. So he went over to my mother. And they chatted for about 3 minutes. And he came back and he said, "Okay, Eli, we will sell it to you for," and he named this humongous price. And Eli said, "Okay, I'll write you 10% check. Don't cash it till next week because I got to cover it." Now, my father could have said more money because he was under orders to buy that house. He had no choice. Now, the ironic thing is I saw that sale used as a comp in appraisals in the future. And the last thing that sale was market value, because there was no condition requisite for a fair sale. The guy was either going to buy the house or get divorced. It was that simple. That's exactly what it came down to. And my parents lived there rent-free for 6 months, built another house, closed on that one, moved out, everything's happy. All right, so we don't know what the conditions that are requisite for a fair sale because markets change. As we have seen, given the price increases that just about every market in the United States has undergone in the last 36 months. Now, George mentioned buyer and seller acting prudently and knowledgeably. Well, okay, that's lovely, but how does a buyer educate him or herself about what's going on in the market? Well, they look to the broker, but the broker doesn't get paid if nobody buys a house. So is the broker giving unbiased, independent information to the potential buyer? We don't know that. Then, okay, what's undue stimulus? If your loan commitment is going to expire in 3 days and you got to make a deal, are you under undue stimulus? I don't know. If there are 3 people waiting in the kitchen to make offers on the house, are you affected by undue stimulus? Well, when this definition was written, yes, you were. But given the current market, no, you're not. That's typical. That's not the least little bit outrageous. Then this part about consummation of a sale, okay, this is lovely, but what happens if you're refinancing your house? There's no sale to consummate. So again, we've talked about buyer and seller are typically motivated. We don't know what that is. Well-informed or well-advised, maybe, maybe not. A reasonable time is allowed for exposure in the open market. Well, when this definition was written, that was assumed to be 3 to 6 months. But now a reasonable exposure time may be measured in hours. So if 3 people are in the kitchen waiting to make offers on your house, is a reasonable exposure time 3 hours? We don't know. This is a big one. Payments made in terms of cash or arrangements comparable thereto. Now, a lot of appraisers say, well, in my market, it's common for the buyer to pay $5,000 of the seller to pay $5,000 of the buyer's closing costs. Okay, but if you look at the Fannie Mae selling guide, the Freddie Mac selling guide, the FHA selling guide, no. Basically, what they say is if there was anything about the payment of the purchase price that inflated it over what it would have been otherwise, you have to account for that, market norms notwithstanding. And quite frankly, that's something the GSEs don't really enforce, frankly. And then the last one is a continuation of the one we just looked at. The price represents normal consideration. Well, okay, normal consideration may be one thing if you've got a 1.5% mortgage, but if you've got an adjustable rate mortgage and it goes up to 3% and you can't afford it, did you pay too much for the property or did you pay too much for the mortgage? So there are some issues there that this definition of market value just doesn't address. Therefore, it's left up to us as the real estate appraisers to figure out if a sale is arm's length or not. Now,
Tim,
we
just
can,
occurred-
we
Yeah, I'm
go
sorry.
ahead, George,
It
jump
just
in there.
occurred to me, the word normal, isn't that kind of circular reasoning there? What is normal? The whole definition is about normal situation, and yet the word normal is right there explaining it's circular. Normal
Yeah.
consideration.
Yeah, how about just consideration or typical consideration or standard or something along those lines? Now, we've been through all of this, but the point that I'm trying to make here is market value is cumulative. In other words, all of these must be present for the transaction to be considered arm's length under that definition. If you're dealing with another definition, fine. But this is the, I don't want to call it the Fannie Mae default definition because that's not the right terminology, but it's the definition that most of us use the vast majority of the time. Now, as George indicated, there are other definitions of market value, but this is the one that residential real estate appraisers are typically appraising to when they are appraising for any one of the GSEs. Now, the point here is the word cumulative. And when we get to highest and best use, highest and best use, and this is the definition of highest and best use out of the textbooks. This is not from USPAP. And then these are other definitions. This is the International Valuation Standards, and this is basically the Yellow Book. And you'll notice they have a lot in common, but they also have a number of differences. But this is what we have to look at. And they're 4 totally separate, totally independent components. The use of the property has got to be legally permissible. Well, now what's interesting is a lot of houses, a lot of subdivisions have ADUs, but the zoning doesn't permit them. So by definition, an ADU is an illegal use. Therefore, the present improvements can't be the highest and best use of the property is improved because the ADU is illegal. Now, the GSEs have said, okay, we're not going to pay any attention to that. But the GSEs accommodating themselves to market conditions. It still violates the definition of highest and best use. Then it's got to be physically possible. In other words, you can't build a 12,000 square foot one-story house on a 10,000 square foot lot. Okay. Then financial feasibility, this is the big one. This is really tough. And the reason I say it's really tough is not that it's difficult to calculate, because it isn't. It's really difficult because when an appraiser says the present improvements on the site are financially feasible, what the appraiser has just said under USPAP is, I have support for that conclusion in the work file. And typically there isn't that support in the work file. The state appraisal board has not only the opportunity, but the responsibility to say to the appraiser, okay, you have said the present improvements are financially feasible. Please show us the report for that conclusion. Now, chances are it's in there. The appraiser just doesn't know it's there. But that's a big bugaboo, because appraisers toss this in, not realizing that they've got to show support for every one of these four. And this last one is important when you're dealing with new property, is not that terribly important when you're dealing with used property, assuming you don't have to do a whole lot of renovations. But let's get into this. We talked about the definition of market value being cumulative. Highest and best use is eliminatory. Consider it a funnel. If Diana Jacob is listening to this, and I think she is, Diana remembers this as the martini glass explanation of highest and best use. You start out with a whole lot of stuff and you narrow it down to one use. How do you narrow it? How do you eliminate all that other stuff? You start with everything that you could possibly do with the property, and then you eliminate everything that's not legal. When you've eliminated everything that's not legal, you are left with physically possible and financially feasible. Then you go and you eliminate everything that is not physically possible. So that leaves only the criterion of financially feasible. Then you have to take all of the financially feasible uses, and chances are there's more than one. You've got to take all the financially feasible uses, and basically that means that that arrow is pointing in the wrong direction. Should be cost is less than value. I should have caught that. Sorry about that, George. Apologize. Cost is less than value, leaving only the financially feasible uses. Then you've got to look at all the financially feasible uses, and of those, which single use results in the highest value. But yet we're told that market value is the most probable price. So which is it? Which one do we come up with? Do we tell the client what the most valuable, what the highest and best use is, which is the highest value? Or do we tell the client the market value, which is the most probable price? And as George is more than happy to indicate, probable, the use of the word probable implies some kind of statistical analysis, but generally, not always, but generally, we appraisers are not blessed with enough data to analyze them statistically to come up with something that is probable. So basically, we're forced to guess. It's an educated guess, but it still comes down to a guess. So there are three conflicts between market value and highest best use. The market value definition is always in relation to cost and value. Market value is the most probable price. So theoretically, that's not possible. The most probable price versus the highest value. Well, which one is it? And then the third one is, does the appraiser have the chops, time, and budget to measure all the feasible uses? Typically, no. And typically the client doesn't want to pay the appraiser to take the time to do those analyses to determine the highest and best use. So now, is for the house that's sitting on the lot, is the highest and best uses improved typically what's there? Yes, it's typically what's there. But we go through this not for the easy ones, we go through this for the hard ones. So what is the most probable price and how does the appraiser measure it? Well, again, we talked about that involves a statistical analysis, which is typically not possible. Costs come from fixed sources. We've got Marshall and Swift. We've got, I don't know, 5 or 6 other costing sources out there. All of them are completely authoritative. I'm not saying any one of them's wrong. But the point is, if you built a house from every possible cost source you could, you're going to come up with 6 numbers. And then let's face it, if you got a hungry contractor, the hungry contractor may build it for no profit whatsoever. Whereas things are busy, and the contractor's making all sorts of money, there's going to be a big old fat profit built in there. So cost sources are not fixed. They're not standard. So how do we reconcile these opposites, these conflicts into a value opinion? Well, this is where we get to Dr. Graskamp. Now, this is 25 North Pinckney in downtown Madison, Wisconsin. This is a recent photo. When Dr. Graskamp did his appraisal, this had been, this is not part of it. This had been a furniture store with a mezzanine, and then up here were the executive offices, and then in the back was an apartment, which apparently had been put to somewhat nefarious uses, and the property owner's wife found out about it, and that's why he needed an appraisal, because he had to sell the property. But now this is a restaurant, and I think this is vacant. I'm not sure. But this is 25 North Pinckney. So I wanted to give you, and then the building's old. It was built like 90, I don't remember. But because it was built to withstand Wisconsin winters, it's probably going to stand forever. So this was Dr. Graskamp's famous, some people call it notorious appraisal. So what Graskamp did to reconcile that definition, that conflict between the definition of market value and highest and best use, was he says there is no such thing as market value. There is merely the most probable price at a property at which a property would sell under a given set of circumstances. And since that those circumstances can change based on supply, demand, politics, weather, any number of factors, that each appraisal of the property had to stand on its own under that given set of circumstances, but that it would not stand under any other set of circumstances, making the appraisal not only specific to the property, but specific to the circumstances under which the appraiser determined it would sell. Okay. So he rejected the concept of highest and best use, instead substituting an analysis of what needed to happen to the building to get it to the point where it would generate a market-based net operating income. And he goes through that in rather great detail in the appendix to the particular report. So Dr. Graskamp basically said, ignore market value because it's an artificial construct. It doesn't mean anything. Ignore highest and best use. It's an artificial construct. It is not universally applicable. What the property should sell for under a given set of circumstances is what appraisers are asked to predict. Okay, so his analyses were market-oriented and practical rather than theoretical and probable. And that is the big difference between what he decided here relative to market value and highest and best use, and those two definitions that we've just gone through. So what are the chances of these two concepts changing from what they are now? Somewhere between 0 and the square root of -1. Those two definitions are just baked in to residential real estate appraisal, and they're never going to change. So what do? Now, this goes back, George was mentioning Lyle Radke, and at the appraisal summit last November in Las Vegas, he got very, Lyle is not a particularly demonstrative guy, but he got rather exercised, for a while anyway, about the fact that appraisers have got to support every conclusion and opinion in that appraisal report. That report has to be in the work file. That's what he meant by reproducible. And George talked about that earlier. So in other words, Fannie Mae had to be able to take the work file, or their reviewer, the AMC or whoever, had to be able to take the work file and then side by side compare it to the appraisal and be able to reproduce the support for every conclusion and opinion the appraiser had in the appraisal and reported in the appraisal report. So that means we've got to document everything in the work file. Now, we don't have time to go into this from a standpoint of bias, but George mentioned Peter Christensen, and there is an article in Working Real Estate Magazine, I think it came out yesterday. It quotes Craig Capilla. Craig's an attorney out of Chicago, and he does a lot of the same things that Peter does. Basically, he said that it's your work file that is going to prove you engaged in no bias. So the concept of a thick, heavy work file is becoming more important. Now, I'm going to get off a little bit in the weeds here. USPAP says you got to have a work file. We don't care if it's within the wings of a manila folder on your desk. We don't care if it's on a travel drive. We don't care if it's you got support in boxes in your basement. We don't care if you have just taken other stuff out of other appraisals, just so long as you've got a work file and you can chronicle and support what you did. That's what USPAP says. Appraisers need to take a very close look at what their state statute says about work files. Because, for example, here in Florida, the state statute says USPAP's wonderful, but when we call for your work file, we don't want to hear about references. We want to see paper, and we want to see it between the wings of a manila folder. Now, if you send them a CD, okay. But you've got to be very, and this goes back to standard 1-1, standard rule 1-1, which says an appraiser is knowledgeable about the laws affecting appraisal. Well, that means, among other things, state statute. And if the state statute says, nope, you got to have stuff in a work file, not reference someplace else, then you got to have stuff in a work file, not reference someplace else, because that's state law. Then we have to explain our conclusions. And this goes back to what George said about what Lyle said. Appraisers tend not to explain things very well. We've got to explain things objectively and persuasively. And what that means is when we say the highest and best use of the subject as improved is in the present improvements, period, way too many appraisals stop there. After the period should be, and here are the reasons why I reached that conclusion. That's the objectively and persuasively part that typically doesn't happen. Every so often, as with any business, you got to have an audit. And there are people out there you can hire on a contract basis who will happily take a couple of your files, go through them, and review them critically. And that may not be the happiest of times, but you want to find out you're doing something improper before the state finds out you're doing something improper. Because when you find out early, you can fix it. When you find out late, you can't fix it. And if we had time, I'd tell you some more stories about what appraisers say to their states when the state said, okay, we think you did something wrong. Would you please explain yourself? And the first thing the appraiser does is write back, well, I didn't mean to do anything wrong, which is just admitting you're guilty. And the second thing they say is, well, this is the way I've always done it, which is admitting you've been doing it wrong for 30 years. So it might help to have an audit on your files. And this is where George's stats, graphs, and data science comes in. We educate ourselves to the point that we become consulting analysts, not merely form fillers. When we're consulting analysts, when we say something is true, we say it's true because we know it is. We've proven it to ourselves out of market data, rather than just filling in the box and moving on. And then a little plug for George. Go to George's website, sign up for his classes, you'll enjoy them. And George really is a wizard at stats and graphs, thus the wizard in the background in the presentation. So George, I know you don't have a beard and you don't wear a funny ass looking hat, but that's supposed to be you.
I do that at night.
Okay. All right. So we will take questions or, hi, Diana. We'll take questions or comments.
Actually, if you don't mind, I'll do the a few more slides and then
Okay,
send
George.
you.
Thank you.
The questions we need. Go ahead and put them on the chat. I want to thank Tim for doing what he did here. Okay, so working towards a solution, which is really the purpose of what we're doing here. We're not here to just make trouble, maybe a little bit. This is about our one reason we do these webinars is to point out that there are solutions that we can move towards. In the last year or two, some of it's been called appraisal modernization. And at first that kind of rubbed me the wrong way, but I kind of agree with that. It's getting the world into the 20th century. Well, the late 20th century. So our basic class is stats, graphs, and data science 1. It relates the whole body of knowledge of data science. Some of the points that Tim just brought up, and the subset of data science is what you and I do, which is we're asset analysts using evidence-based valuation. Basically, this includes the proper use of graphs. Graphs are colorful, they're easy, they help the human brain understand large groups of data, but they can also be misused. I often say, can you lie with statistics? Everybody says, yeah. Can you lie with graphs? Everybody says, yeah. Can you lie with words? What's the one thing in common? So our job is to use graphs and statistics properly. We also focus on price indexing, which is also both Lyle and Scott emphasized that in the last couple of conversations I've had with them or the presentations they've made. Doing a better job, especially with the way the market's been, the dramatic changes. So price indexing can be used for time adjustments. Once you get a reliable time adjustment, it effectively expands your data set. You get better comps. And it improves the results, both the precision and the accuracy of your results. And it enables delivering a data stream. You know, when we get rid of the forms, there's not going to be a new form to replace the old form. It's going to be a data stream which is delivered to our clients, and they have dashboards. The dashboards being adapted to the particular user. So delivering a data stream rather than filling in the boxes. You recall the words factual, objective, reproducible, auditable. Those are essential elements of good data science. And the GSEs and really all our clients need price indexing. They need forecast values, whether for investment or collateral security. Our clients really need to know their risk or potential, not a point value opinion 2 weeks ago. Market analysis, kind of wrapping up what Tim talked about, serves two important functions, provides a background for local developments and the larger continuing of price changes. It's not just market conditions, but the value of the dollar is also included in time adjustments. So in a way, market conditions is a misnomer because the time adjustment includes both market conditions and changes in price levels. And data inclusions for price indexing are needed everywhere else in the process. That's why we spend a lot of time on that in our classes. By the way, these are all quotes right out of the appraisal of real estate. So we do exploratory data analysis, looking at neighborhoods, looking at towns, looking at cities, depending on your property type. Price indexing, accounting for the change in market conditions, and collecting, verifying, and analyzing the data, sometimes called cleaning or wrangling the data. Getting the right data is the key to it. If you get the right data, the answer pretty much falls out. Before we're done here today, I'm going to turn it over to Bruce for just a couple of minutes, or three or four minutes. He uses R, which is a software we use almost exclusively in some of his work. And getting the right data, he says you practically don't need adjustments once you get the data right. And we talk about the 5-step analysis process in data science. We have two primary graphs that we show, the histogram. These are groupings of prices. That could be living area. This is a neighborhood, so it describes the level of prices in a particular neighborhood. It's a distribution of one variable. This is sale prices. It could be square foot, could be square foot land, any measure variable. Scatter plot compares two variables. In this case, we've got time on the x-axis, sale price on the y-axis, and from that you start to get it. Your eyes now can see a change in the trend. And then we also add a simple regression to that and other things to model the trend correctly. And it gives you actually a dollar amount, dollars per day time adjustments. Very, very powerful. Here's a graph that I've recently started using. I noticed that John Ferris is on here. He's a member of our community of asset analysts, been to a couple of our stats and graphs too in our community meetings. This is a graph I know he uses. Basically, the red bars are your neighborhood. These are what you think is going to be part of your overall data set. You reduce that or control that for your elements of comparison, like living area, site area, whatever else. That would be these green bars. So with one visual like this, you can say, look, here's the data I inspected. Here's what I've decided is competitive to the subject. And then you can put a line up and down, say, here's my subject property and my conclusion, all with one graph. It's extremely powerful, very visual, easy to understand. And I think even a regulatory board that was chasing you would believe the last words Tim mentioned about what happens when you're attacked. You show this, at least you wow them. You impress them with people like colors, by the way, too. So the colors help a lot. Pictures were visual. So market price indexing is important because it takes historical data, brings it to a today value. It expands your comparable data set effectively, provides a calculated time adjustment. It's math. There's actually no probability left in there once you've got the data set right. It improves the accuracy of other adjustments. And price indexing spans the entire process from the beginning, picking that data to delivery to the client. Here's a quick example of it. Behind the dots is a trend line. That's a simple regression. This is a linear one, straight line. You don't have to have linear, but that's a modeling decision that one or two sentences you can explain what you did if the trend line is not exactly a straight line. So why do we emphasize price indexing? It's easy to apply. Once you've done this a few times, you can do it in about 30 seconds or less. Once you got your data right, you can create a graph like this and paste it in seconds, not minutes. It improves other adjustments. It increases your useful data set. Older students like you and me, or most of us, we learn by connecting new ideas to old ideas. So everything we teach connects all of your prior appraisal knowledge with today's technology. And it integrates the market analysis that Tim talked about. It actually helps ameliorate or reduce the grossness of the property that Tim talked about. I didn't know how bad it was until today, Tim. Thank you. And it relates to each of the 5 steps of evidence-based valuation and the fundamental principles of data science. Here's a box and whiskers, which is great for location adjustments. This is actual sales data. It's from an example I used in San Diego. The subject property is in this neighborhood, and this neighborhood is right across, just on the other side of the freeway, much nicer neighborhood. If you control for living area and other features, the difference, this is the median of neighborhood 1. This is the median of neighborhood 2. This forms a good indicator of location adjustment, just right across the freeway. And then finally, we always close the class with the importance of critical thinking or statistical thinking. I wish I could remember who said this: the awakening of the intellectual to the study of itself. Given our political situation today in this country, we need to dedicate ourselves to critical thinking and asking questions of where could I be wrong, rather than where can I be right? How can I prove that I'm right? We need that. So critical thinking includes evaluating, problem solving, decision making, analyzing, and reasoning. So I always close every class with a little bit on critical thinking. One of the parts of that is tolerance for ambiguity. Sometimes you don't get the right answer and you just have to give a range. You have to explain and understand it, be comfortable with uncertainty. And a lot of statistics is about how to deal with uncertainty. And this word uncertainty relates directly to risk and reliability, which is what our clients really want to know. What's their risk of loss or possibility of gain? Or if it's a court or a tax assessor, what's the probability of fairness? Evidence-based valuation practice requires the things you already know as an appraiser, your experience. We do use open source software that's free, designed specifically for analytics. It's called R and R Studio. It creates new opportunities for appraisers because we have additional services we can sell. There is a learning curve, absolutely, but it's not difficult to learn. And I'm going to turn it over to Bruce in just a second here, and he'll talk about. I always love Bruce when he talks about how this stuff made appraisal fun for him again. And so we use something called R Studio in the packages. It was designed from the ground up for data analytics. Spreadsheets were designed for accountants to add up large columns and numbers. Everything else is an add-on after that. Forms are forms, you know that. So we go from data to information to graphs to a time adjustment in the class. So what is R? It's the world's most powerful language for analytics. There is a community, a strong community in the world of R. I mean, millions of people. And we have a community of asset analysts, which we now number over 100 people that are appraisers like you and me, who call themselves asset analysts. So R is a tool, it's the core of a community, and it forms a new competence that will be needed for modernized appraisal. How to measure markets instead of comparing comps. Measure markets instead of comparing comps. Here's a quick example of what R Studio looks like. R and R Studio take advantage of large modern technology, hardware, high resolution screens and interaction. You do stuff here. The script is like a word processor, and you do something and the answer and results and graphs show up down here. All you have to do is move your eyes instead of changing programs from one to another. So it's designed for modern hardware also, and the big screens that you're looking at right now. It connects the human brain with large amounts of data. The brain zonks out after about 6 or 7 data points. We use summary statistics, not inferential statistics. We use a lot of graphs, maps. I wish we had time to have Bruce demonstrate as an example, but I'm just going to have him talk a little bit about what he's done. And I'll move on there. It brings in other statistical stuff that is practical. Advantages of R, though I'll end and turn it over to Bruce for just a couple of minutes, and then we will open it up for questions. If you have any questions, just do it on the chat notes. All spreadsheet functions are available in R. It's designed for analytics. There's not add-ons kludged onto a spreadsheet. Concise commands for calculations. What you do is always reusable. Note the word reusable. That's very close to the word reproducible, very close to the word auditable. R is designed for reproducible work. You do one file and it keeps your words, your graphs, your narratives, your analysis, any code you might have in there. It's highly reliable. It's fun and rewarding once you get past the initial learning. Error checking is great. Boy, the help function is incredible. Absolutely incredible. This is people doing stuff out of the goodness of their heart. The reason you may have never heard about R Studio, is because it's open source. Yet there is no marketing budget. Nobody's selling you this thing. So there is no marketing budget. The only reason you hear about stuff like this is because people like us who do use it are spreading the word. So that's the purpose of this webinar, to help spread the word. If you work in an office with many appraisers, so if some of your larger offices where 2 or 3 appraisers or analysts will work on one file, they don't end up stepping on each other's foot. Particularly good at plots, and a lot more fun once you get used to the hang of it. And I will turn it over to Bruce for just a couple of minutes here. Bruce, are you there? I'll turn off my share if you'll turn yours on.
Hi, George. Well, I'm just going to say things. I don't have anything to share. So leave the screen if people are stuck with my ugly mug in a bigger space. So bottom line, the things that you talk about keep making more and more sense to me. They have from the beginning. All of the tools that you just showed really illustrate things. And they continue to show to me that unfortunately, our old friend, the URAR, is a dead dinosaur that is going to go away. And it should. I moved this last year. And in so doing, I used all the tools that consumers use. I used on my smartphone, the Realtor app. I used Zillow. And it's just amazing how much information is right there right under the nose of a consumer. And what do we do as appraisers? We still pick 3, 5, 6, 7 comps, whatever we put on the form, and we exclude all that other information that's out there. I looked at them all when I was buying a house. We are doing ourselves a disservice. We cause more questions than we provide answers with the tired old URAR form. And when you start to put everything that's applicable in and analyze it and use the data visualization tools that are so powerful, you really do get to some answers. It does make it more fun again to really dig in, look at the whole market, not just the house you're appraising or the property. And I think we provide, as you say, much better services, or we can. It really is. It's fun. There's a little learning curve to this, but it's manageable. And as you said, it's reusable. Once you get it, it's really easy to modify. And after that little learning curve, you have tools that can be reused. I still think all the things Tim pointed out really matter. As you said, the domain expertise is important. These are all skill sets that position us to do all kinds of different things if we're using a complete data set. And thank you for all of what you do with stats, graphs, and data science, because definitely makes appraisal more fun again.
Well, thank you, Bruce. And Bruce has, of course, done one of these presentations with us and been a tremendous support and pushing forward. And I want to also acknowledge John Ferris, who is part of our community of asset analysis, who's strictly a residential appraiser and knows more about R than anybody here, and especially me. Thank you for being here, John. And John and Joe and Craig are here to also help answer questions. With that, let me just mention a couple more names. Lisa Forbes, who's helped me in many classes, especially when we first started 10, 15 years ago. Dave Town helped me a couple of times. Let's see, Norm Anderson. Oh, yes, Norm Andersen, who will be acting as an assistant in the class in Boston coming up in March. I want you to know in 15 years of teaching this material, I have never taught a class without at least one assistant that gives hands-on software help to people if you come to one of our classes. So with that, I'll turn it over to, oh yes, and Bill King is also on here today, and he'll be one of our guests coming up probably this summer. So Cindy, I'll turn it over to you, and if you'll read the questions as they kind of came in, she will filter them out and we'll answer the questions.
I'm going to turn it over to Joe Lynch.
Okay, thank you.
So the first question is for Tim. Craig Gilbert asks, has Tim been involved as an expert with regards to any racial bias claims against appraisers?
The answer is that's confidential. That's all I can say at this point.
Okay. Do you have any advice that you can offer in a brief moment for the rest of us?
Yes, win the state lotto. From a standpoint of advice, we talked about this with we mentioned Peter Christensen, we mentioned Craig Capilla. It's basically going to come down to your work file. And you know, in the past, we've thrown a couple of sheets from MLS in there, and you know, maybe something we got off realtor.com. Okay, that's fine. There's certainly nothing wrong with that. But when we're talking about a thick work file documenting what you've done, and George goes through this in stats and graphs. Basically, you say, okay, well, there are 27 comparable sales in the neighborhood over the last 5 years. Okay. Well, the state is going to want to see that you analyzed, or that you chose those 27 sales and then ran them through some kind of analysis in order to eliminate those that were obviously not comparable for whatever reason. It was a divorce, it was the sale from a parent to a child, that kind of thing. Then the next set of iterations is going to be, okay, let me get rid of the stuff that is significantly bigger than the subject. Let me get rid of the stuff that's significantly smaller than the subject. And then finally, where you get it down to where you've got 6 or 8 sales that, as George has mentioned, are really like the subject. And then at that point, the issue of adjustments becomes significantly smaller, because you don't have to adjust for major differences. You're going to have to adjust for a couple of small ones, sure, because no two properties are the same. But one of the questions state boards tend to ask is, okay, your adjustment ratio was only 9.5%, but you got 9 adjustments. Really? 9 adjustments is a comparable? And the appraiser has to be able to say, well, yeah, it is. And if the appraiser can't, then states start, you see heads drop and you see pens start to write, and what they're writing is competency, ? So what George is saying is not only being able to avoid issues with bias, it's being able to avoid issues with competency. It's being able to avoid issues with scope of work. It's being able to avoid a lot of issues that are common and that tend to get appraisers in trouble when, and I'm not saying it's not the appraiser's fault, but so often we don't have a deep background in all of the tools that are available to us to come to a credible value conclusion. And I don't think anybody really thinks that interest rates are going to continue as low as they are now. They're eventually going to go back up. And in fact, they've opened Bloomberg or the Wall Street Journal or any number of the financial papers over the last couple of weeks, and everybody's saying, yep, interest rates are going up. Well, as interest rates go up, sales prices are going to go down. And when somebody who bought a house 2 years ago at 2% interest wants to refinance their house, but interest rates are at 4%, And the appraiser says, well, you paid $800,000 for it 2 years ago at the top of the market. The market has softened and now it's only worth $600,000. Well, basically that's an invitation. That's like saying, here, I'm going to put my hand on your wet bar here in the kitchen, and you can start smacking me with a hammer, because that's exactly what's going to happen to appraisers. So as a result, that particular appraiser not only must be able to support the original $800,000, right down to the nails and the paint in the house. They're going to have to be able to justify that decrease in value right down to the nails and the paint in the house. And so when we say a big work file, a thick work file, a complete work file is going to help you in all sorts of situations, this is basically what we mean.
Thank you, Tim. If I can chime in on that, one of the things that we emphasize in the stats, graphs, and data science classes is that not that appraisers are biased, although that can happen, I guess. The point is that the appraisal process of picking 3 comps is vulnerable to accusations of bias. That's really what came up in the webinar with Pete Christensen, is that if you're using subjective methods to pick 3 comps or pick 5 comps, there's nothing other than your subjective judgment. And the humans we're subject to bias. It's just a natural part of being human. So by using something like this graph, pretty much covers it. So what we try to do is provide a way of analyzing and just showing how we got the data that we got. It's that simple. All right, let's go on to the next one.
Okay, there was a follow-up from Dan Stadnick, and I'm just going to summarize, but a sufficient work file is not a practical solution. The fees don't justify putting together a sufficient work file for defense. So I think Tim could probably address that quickly if you want to. Or not. Joe Nunn has a question for George. A little off topic. I use price indexing on all my appraisals to establish market condition adjustments. I typically do both a linear and third order polynomial over a 12-month period and usually over a 6-month period. Oftentimes the equation of dollar per day change between the two are quite a bit different. A bit of a loss as to which one is better to use.
Actually, the answer is simple and complicated at the same time. The simple answer is, if you measure a market area or market segment over 18 months, or you measure it over 12 months or over 6 months, you're going to get different answers. So part of what we teach is how to go back far enough in time. If you go back 18 months, then typically we want to look at the last 12 months. Basically, as a rule of thumb, what we teach is that go back as far as you think as your oldest comp would need to be with your traditional thinking. We try to tie in traditional thinking with the new method. And we use a third order polynomial to help the eye see that change. And then it's easy to justify. If we went back 9 months, the third order polynomial lays on top of the straight line. You're done. You pretty much proven the point. If it's different now, your brain says, wow, I better just cut this down to the last 6 months. It only takes a sentence or two to explain that. I went to 6 months because it looked like there was a change. Here's the graph. Here's where the polynomial, the curve line shifted. That's why I chose that. And it's really hard to defeat that. I mean, the logic is clean and simple, and it's a modeling decision. Very, very, very generally saying, data science is different from statistics in one major way. Statistics is very theoretical. Data science, listen to these words, data science explicitly recognizes the need for the expert modeler, the expert opinion. That's you, that's me. The need for judgment and opinion will never go away. All we can do is make it better, make it more refined. And we use the visual tools and some simple statistics, the descriptive statistics to help us do that and to demonstrate it and to make our work reproducible. If it's reproducible, the points at which you can be attacked become really small. I'll stop there.
He had another question, a couple of questions. He asked also if there's a Stats and Graphs in Data Science 2 class, and I said yes, and it's highly recommended. And everyone who takes Stats and Graphs 1 should take the second class. And he said, well, cool, but it's not on the website. So do you have a Stats and Graphs 2 coming soon?
The answer is yes. We were hoping to schedule one for March, but this new version of COVID came along.
Yeah.
Our intention at the end of last year was to have Stats and Graphs twice this coming year, once online, once in person. We'll probably do the in-person class around September, October of this year in northern Pennsylvania. My mentor, Charlie Abramitis, lives in London, Ontario, so he can just swim right across Lake Erie to get to northern Pennsylvania. So he'd be able to go. We may still do one online Stats and Graphs 2 in April or May. The COVID thing's really messed us up. I had to postpone the Boston class from 2 weeks till 2 months from now. So we're just playing it by ear the best we can.
Yeah, it's screwed up our schedule completely too. So I'm very sympathetic.
We will do it. Stay tuned.
Yeah. So I'm happy to hear I'll be going to northern Pennsylvania soon. So I've never been to Pennsylvania before. So very cool. Let's see.
Let me just mention along those lines, we always have our meetings of the community of asset analysts adjacent to Stats and Graphs 2 class. At least we have in the past.
Scott Cullen asked a question that I think was for George that I don't understand. And so, Scott, maybe if you want to take yourself off mute and ask George directly. It was something regarding dollar per day applied to different price houses.
And the question is, if you have a range of houses between, let's say, $400,000 and $600,000 in your time series, and you end up with $1 per day of $50, does that apply to both the $400,000 house and the $600,000 house?
Yes, it does. Let me try to give a straightforward answer to that. You're focusing around you're controlling on living area. You're controlling on all the other major differences. So hopefully you didn't control by saying 400,000 to 600,000. That's the result of your analysis, not the assumption of your analysis. And so presumably your subject property would be worth somewhere around 500,000 because it's in the middle of the data set that you selected in the first place. You didn't select it by price. You selected by the other features, by living area, site area, whether it's got a swimming pool or not, the quality of the construction, whatever is important in that particular appraisal, you'll have controlled for that, and everything else is centered. The general answer is sometimes randomness is your enemy, and sometimes randomness is your friend. Once you've controlled carefully, now the randomness assures that you're going to come somewhere near the center. And the answer is yes, you would adjust the dollars per day. Again, if you do dollars per day per square foot, I don't want to get this too complex, but if you do dollars per square foot per day, like a commercial appraisers would normally do, you have to multiply back by the living area of the subject property, not each comp, because it's the subject property that you've centered your market analysis on. You're analyzing the market, not the comps. So you're adjusting the trend in the market, not the change in specific prices. Hope that answers the question. That's the best I can do, at least right now.
Yeah,
And in class, we spend an hour and a half on that stuff.
There's a follow-up. Michael Hanton asked, why not convert dollars today to percent per month, per day or month? And if I understand what you've said many times to me, it's because it's easy to just do the dollar adjustment. It falls out of the way you do it anyway. So why do extra math and create additional uncertainty? And and instead just make the adjustment based on what the procedure gives you. Is that
Yeah.
fair?
Yeah, absolutely. The simple answer is you've already got the dollar adjustment. Why convert it to percentage? Then you have to decide, well, percentage for 9 months, per day, for a year. Is it annualized? Is it a compound interest? The other answer is we got asked that question a lot, is because the software providers for residential forms forced a percentage entry. Now, as far as I know, all three of the major forms providers for residential appraiser, because of what we talked about, I started with Wayne Pugh, as a friend of mine that does SFREP software. He immediately, within 2 days after I talked to him on the phone about why this kept coming up, and enabled his software to be adjusted just for dollars per day rather than forcing a percentage adjustment. Let's see, Bill King, are you here? Do you know if the software you work with, Bill, are you still on? Okay, I guess he's gone, because he runs software for.
Hey, you calling on me, George?
Yeah.
I was distracted for a moment. I apologize. So if you said anything nice about me, I missed it.
No, it wasn't nice. I'm going to.
Oh, good. Well, I'm glad you haven't lost your mind. I'm glad you haven't lost your mind.
Bill and I have taught a couple of classes together. Your software is enabled now to plug in a dollars per day time adjustment, whereas in the past it was strictly a percentage adjustment was forced. Do you
Right. You have a lot of flexibility, and again, I apologize. I had been distracted for quite a few minutes, so I missed the conversation leading up to this. But yes, there are a number of ways that an appraiser can apply adjustments for time within ClickForms. And we're going to be having some new releases in the future that will expand those flexibilities even further. So beyond just time adjustments, but more flexibility for how adjustments are applied generally.
Very good, thank you. And I understand Alamode also has enabled dollar per day adjustments also directly. Yeah. So I'm really glad to hear that. It really avoids, you've already got the answer, why go to a percentage, which then you have to explain what time period you got it over. It complicates things.
Sure.
Okay. Joe, next question.
Shannon Slater, hey Shannon, mentioned that total right now is only percentages for time adjustments. I'm pretty sure that's true. Be nice if they caught up with the rest of us, or not. It doesn't really matter. I do everything outside of total anyway. Michael Hansen asked a follow-up question, but I think it's best if you just engage you directly, George. So
very good. Happy to do that.
That's pretty much it as far as questions on the chat. So John Ferris points out that you can do monthly dollar adjustments in total. So it sounds like, Shannon, if you want to talk to total, there's a way to kind of back into it, but it's just easier to use a different vehicle to generate your time adjustments for your columns and then drop them straight into total.
Any more questions for Tim in particular? This is your last shot at Tim.
I've got a question for Tim. So this is related to the earlier question about what racial bias and how appraisers are under more scrutiny these days. What should an appraiser do if someone contacts him regarding an appraisal and either a question about racial bias or any other issue with the appraisal?
Obviously, if it's not the client, the appraiser must demur to the client. But if it's, for example, it's somebody from the state calling saying, we've received a complaint and we're going to investigate it, then at this point, it's no longer an appraisal problem. It's a legal problem. And you need to involve legal counsel. If you go back to the OREP article that was published, I think yesterday, one of the issues that Craig Capella makes is that HUD is going to investigate certain of these. And of course, HUD is, national, federal, and it will come to a conclusion whether there was or was not discrimination. And if there was, it may walk that over to the Justice Department. If there wasn't, it may drop everything. But if you get notified, now somebody says, well, did you take account the sales in less than so neighborhood, which has minorities? You can answer yes or no. But if it's somebody is saying we're looking at suing you, we're looking at filing charges against you, blah blah blah, at that point you need an attorney, and you don't need a tax attorney, and you don't need a divorce attorney. You need an attorney who is familiar with administrative law issues and possibly with HUD regulation issues as well. And that kind of narrows things down very far. There are relatively few attorneys in the U.S. with that area, with those two areas of expertise. But yeah, if somebody's going to file a complaint with HUD or the state or anything like that, then yeah, that's not an appraisal problem anymore. That's now a legal problem, and you need legal advice.
Bill King has he wants to clarify.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, so for users in ClickForms that are on the current iteration, which is 9.36, it does not allow daily, it only allows monthly. We have a new release, 9.4 something or other. We have a couple hundred people beta testing that right now. It'll be ready for prime time, I'm hoping within a matter of weeks. And I believe that we will have expanded adjustment for time in that iteration. So I'll double check that, but I just wanted to clarify that A, it's not in 9.36, which is the primary version out right now, and B, we've been aware of the need for this issue and are working to make sure it's incorporated. So thank you.
Very good. Can I point out on that if you go to the monthly, you're always in danger of one of your comps sold on May 31st or May 30th. The next one sold on June 1st, and suddenly you've got a jump in the dollar amount for one day. If you've got the data on exact sale date, you use the data you got. You don't throw it away. You don't average out to the month.
Agree completely, Jeff. Part of the George, the part of the decision initially was in response to the UAD requirement for showing only month and year.
Right.
Yeah.
And Scott Cullen has a question on, please direct us to the best way to get started with R.
Can I take that?
Do I have to answer that?
I would say come to George's classes. So, take Stats and Graphs Data Science 1, sit next to Bruce or John Ferris and look over their shoulder and take their phone numbers and then just work with them to get up to speed. But, definitely I think George is the best way to get started for an appraiser.
Each time we've given the class, we bring in a little more R. Number one, we've learned how to use it more. Number two, I've learned how to teach it better. It's a whole world. It's not just a software package that here you go, push the button. It's a whole world. There are probably 20,000 different packages that you can get for free. The difficulty is figuring out how do you find the package you need. There are literally packages written about helping you find right packages. The basics are simple, but we're learning how to do it better. We got a group of people that share, the community of asset analysts. They'll come to the Stats and Graphs class, and then you're invited to them. But by the way, one little pitch here. We do for $199 per year. We do have the TAR, the asset analyst report, And if you subscribe to that, you can have the class for half price. So it's quite a bargain, really. We're doing anything we can to encourage you to not only learn, but to belong and help our movement. Bruce, do you have anything to share along those lines? Are you there, Bruce?
Yes, so I would just say there's so much material available online on how to learn R. I definitely think you want to take stats, graphs, and data science 1, 2 is good too. But even the R Studio website now has a lot of learning where you can just go in. There's a couple of books. The Big Book of R is a great resource. If you search for that, you'll get links to a whole bunch of books on how to use R. But R for Data Science is one of the books linked in the Big Book of R. Yeah, there's so much online on how to use it now. Start at the R Studio website. They have a lot of tutorials there.
This book I just threw up here. Now, this is a hard copy. I actually have 2 hard copies, one for upstairs, one for downstairs. That's how much in love I am. But you can get this book for free online, including the code.
Well, the best part about it online is you can cut and paste the code into the R Studio interface and make the code work and then manipulate it to see what little changes do. That's how you learn.
You could just copy and use the code, but you need to know a little bit about it. So it's, the flexibility is the most wonderful part of it. You can do anything you want with R Studio. R is the underlying analytics package. So R Studio is a user interface with those 4 panes, those 4 windows that I showed on the one slide. Next.
Well, one comment, I'm sorry, I'm jumping in. One comment is if you are a graduate of Stats and Graphs 1 and you're not a member of the Asset Analyst Report, email me and I'll send you an invitation. There is a lot of smart people in there and there's a lot of code. And then take Stats and Graphs 1 again, so you get caught up to what we're currently doing. Be really great. And then see you in Stats and Graphs 2.
I just talked to one fellow that was planning on coming to the class in Boston in a couple of weeks and I called everybody to let them know that we were postponing the class because of COVID. And before we got off the phone, he committed himself to not only coming to the online class next month, but he's going to come to the in-person class in Boston in March. Why? It's because people that have taken my class repeatedly say, it's a lot of material. It's kind of a fire hose effect. I admit that. I know that's what it is. It's a lot of new material. But anybody that's ever taken the class twice, the second time said they got more out of it the second time than the first time.
So George, here's another comment for you. This is from Brent Johnson. While I appreciate the daily market change calculations, especially as just noted by the last day of the month to the first day of the month, does the applying of a daily dollar market change adjustment over a correlated or reconciled percentage adjustment imply a precision level that may exceed the imprecise level of a given market?
Well, there's an answer to that. Is because of the dollars per day adjustment is math. It's not probability. The probability comes in with your choice of data selection in the first place. Once you've got the data selected, you have the date of sale and the sale price. From that point on, it's pure math, and it is a number. It's not a probability. You cannot be challenged or attacked by a reviewer, underwriter, anybody on the math. You can only be attacked on you picked the wrong data in the first place, and that's a lot harder to do. You put them on, you put the reviewer, underwriter in the spot of saying, well, what data should I have used? They can't do it.
Nothing else is coming through. So
I have one person ask a question. Joe Harvard, who's taken Stats and Graphs 1 and R for Appraisers, has a question of what happened to the R for Appraisers class. So I'm gonna throw that at George.
Well, I do a lot of stuff, and I wish there was three of me. We could do that. Probably, you know what? Let me tell you the real answer. The real answer is that for us to do one class and give credit all over the country costs about $7,000 the first go around. It's only good for 2 years, and it takes Cindy about 1/3 of her 40-hour week to maintain one class. So look at the cost of doing that. It's almost impossible to do this and create new content. I've been encouraged by people, however, who say, we don't give a damn about credit. I just want to learn the stuff. And I'm seeing kind of a bifurcated appraisal world of the people that take class for hours, dollars for hours, and people who take hours for learning and for the future. I was talking to a friend yesterday who is doing a lot of review work and commercial appraisal. He's saying he's seeing more and more evaluations done internally by banks, collateral lenders, and instead of using appraisers. The Appraisal Institute continues losing members, licensed appraisers. We continue losing people. And let me get a little bit bitter. We are paying the price for our USPAP classes every 2 years, the USPAP book every 2 years. I'm a USPAP instructor, so I have to take a teacher's class every 2 years, I think. I can't remember. We pay our dues or fees that goes to the regulatory commissions, and our competition, the AVM people and the evaluators, they don't have to pay any dues, fees, or taxes. We pay the whole freight. We are literally, in my opinion, being discriminated against and favored. Our competition is favored. And Craig, I see your for some reason your picture's on my screen. You have a word to add to that? Craig Gilbert. Craig has contributed dramatically to our class in the past. You need to unmute yourself. Okay. This is amazing. Craig has nothing to say. This is.
I was not. Hey, the host was not allowing me to unmute myself. I was locked.
Okay.
I was kind of going back to what you were answering earlier about your other classes and state approvals and so forth. One thing I want to throw out to everybody, if they take one of Georgia's and it's not state approved, there's a good chance that you can get it approved through a petition. So many states do that. So I thought I'd just throw that out. I do that all the time. Things that I take that are not state approved, just put the documentation together, pay my $50 to the state. So that was it.
Oh, thank you. And Cindy's happy to send you whatever they need. Usually they need a timed outline and just a summary of what the class is. But it'll cost you. It'll cost you. It'll be $25 or $50 or whatever. Yeah.
I did get a question for Tim come through from John Ferris. John says, I don't find a lot of highest and best use issues in residential appraisal. Most homes are R1 zoning, so the legality mostly ends the analysis right there. But when there is other zoning, I found many AMCs and lenders don't really understand the issue of highest and best use. So does Tim have any language for those users to help address such issues?
Yes, but it's rude. First of all, John, I admire your beard. That's you've just helped me set a goal. Thank you very much. From a standpoint of your typical highest and best use, highest and best use is the house that's there 98% of the time. The problem is not so much that the appraiser gets it wrong. The problem is if the appraiser is called to support it, the appraiser doesn't have the support for it in the work file. And then that reviewers, AMCs, et cetera, don't understand highest and best use. No, they don't. It's basically that simple. And part of the problem is we as appraisers are not trained in highest and best use. Think about it. You're going to school 2 nights a week, 4 hours a pop for 12 weeks. And chances are you spent maybe 1 hour of one 4-hour class covering highest and best use. And chances are the instructor said, just check the box. It doesn't really mean anything and move on. But it goes a lot deeper than just checking the box. And again, the problem is not so much that the appraiser is wrong. The chances are the appraiser isn't. It's when the appraiser is called on to support that conclusion, can the appraiser do so out of the market? If the appraiser can, great, home free. But if the appraiser can't, then state appraisal boards tend to jump all over that. And as a reviewer, one of the things that almost the first step I take is go to highest and best use. And it'll say right there, the current improvements are financially feasible. So I get a hold of the appraiser and say, okay, where's your support for it? And they don't know. Now, I don't review from the standpoint of banks and AMCs. I'm a USPAP instructor, as is George and Diana and a few other people in the room. So I review for USPAP compliance and internal consistency and logic and stuff like that. And when the appraiser says, I certify that to the best of my knowledge and belief, every statement of fact in this appraisal report is true and correct, and the appraiser says that the present improvements are financially feasible, and then the appraiser cannot support that as true and correct out of the work file, that is a really potential problem. But 98% of the time, the appraiser is right. The highest and best use is what's there. Yeah. And again, John, I'm jealous of your beard, especially the color. Look at mine. It's all white. So I appreciate the question. Thank you.
Along those lines, I
Sir.
do want, let me mention one thing. In my opinion, the best class the Appraisal Institute has ever presented is called Highest and Best Use and Market Analysis. I qualified to teach that class. I may still do, I don't teach it anymore, but I thought that was one of the best classes I've ever had in my life. Highest and Best Use Market Analysis class by the Appraisal Institute. It's one of the advanced classes. Okay.
Craig Gilbert wanted to add to something George mentioned. With regards to George's statement that appraisers are discriminated against, the AVMs do not have to provide highest and best use. They're exempt from USPAP.
Gosh, I've been working with a committee under the Appraisal Foundation, under the Industry Advisory Council, on a work group that's writing or working towards developing standards for AVMs. And one of the conclusions or concepts that we've absolutely come up is that the appraisal process or the valuation process is the same. It's just a matter of who does it and how well do they do it. And in the case of AVMs, somebody makes the decision, whether it's the client or the borrower or some programmer at some point in the distance past who said this is a house. Somebody makes that decision. It's a matter of how good is that decision, how well supported is it. With AVMs, it's assumed that it's a house. Although now we're getting AVMs for other purposes, not just houses and condos, 2 to 4 units, small retail. We're seeing more and more of that. The algorithmic fallacies. Somebody makes that decision, or the algorithm does.
Craig, did you want to add to what George just said? You're muted.
All right. No, a program cannot be subject to USPAP. A person, like an appraiser, is subject to USPAP. That my only point was, we go through all this machinations to determine highest and best use, to determine the value of a simple residential property or whatever it might be. But again, the AVM just spits out a number. So it might be the same number, but it's okay to not have a highest and best use in their analysis. So that's kind of my point. It doesn't bother me. It's just what we're up against. We're, as appraisers, are asked to do more and more, but the competition is doing actually less and less, other than the black box algorithms, which I have no problem with. but it's what the residential appraisers doing mortgage work are in effect competing with. And now with these, as you mentioned earlier, the inspections being done separately from the appraisal, at some point, those are going to go directly to the automation, that inspection. It won't go to an appraiser. It will go to an AVM. So that's kind of my point. We're working ourselves harder and harder, and a lot of clients are paying less. I don't do any mortgage work, so it's not affecting me directly, but we all have to at least be aware of what we're competing with. And in 2021, the GSEs were able to do 49% of their transactions automated only. And that will go up, of course.
Are we done?
I'm done.
So
Okay.
I've let everybody unmute themselves if they have a question they just want to throw out there.
Okay, here's how we're going to do this.
Wait. I want to
okay.
have people, you should, if you're not signed up for Tim Andersen's blog or his podcast,
Yeah.
go to the appraisersadvocate.com and sign up. Sign up. He's got some good stuff.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Tim. Really appreciate it. Tim has helped a lot of appraisers, especially those that get in trouble. We'll consider the class officially over. It wasn't really a class. However, I'm happy to hang around. Sometimes some of the best conversation takes place after the end where people are loose. So feel free. We'll be here another 15 minutes at least, longer if it's interesting. Other than that, I really appreciate everybody being here. Please consider coming to the class. I'm semi-retired. This is a labor of love for me. Really, the profession's been really good to me, and I'm trying to give back what I can. Thanks to the people like Ann and those who help promote the class. Thank you. The rest of you go home.
Thank you, everybody.